بإسلامي وإيماني أضاء الكون وزمن بإسلامي وإيماني أضاء الكون وزمن.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه وبعد. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So my name is Shams Ad Duha. Some of you may know me. I'm the director of Ebrahim College and also on the governing body of Ebrahim Academy. The reason for today's meeting, in addition to the fact that it's a parents' evening and so forth, which I'm sure you've been told in letters and so on, but the reason why I'm speaking to you is to very briefly, and we really don't have a great deal of time, but to briefly go through some things regarding to your child's tahfidh, to your child's memorization of the Quran. Just to give you some background, obviously Ebrahim Academy is a tahfidh based Islamic school. So we teach the national curriculum with a large chunk of the day being dedicated to memorization of the Quran, and then in addition there's also an Islamic studies and Arabic language curriculum as well. So it's particularly because of the tahfidh component, it is quite a rigorous secondary school program. Most of you have your own, and usually I think quite aligned motivations for why you've sent your son to memorize the Quran. And I suppose if I asked you to raise hands and tell me what those motivations are, most of you would say very, very similar things. Now, the thing is that sometimes just being motivated about achieving something and putting your child into a school that aims to achieve the objectives that you have in your mind isn't sufficient when it comes to meeting those objectives. On our part as a school, we also realize just having a school that offers tahfidh is also not enough to achieve those objectives. We have to constantly be trying our best to operate at the optimum level. We have to constantly be looking at ways to improve our provision in tahfidh in order to make sure that in what are unique circumstances, it's a day school. Most children that memorize the Quran do it in a much more conducive environment, sometimes in either a boarding school or in certain communities where tahfidh has become, I think the whole effort to make children memorize the Quran is quite well established over many, many decades. Children manage to memorize the Quran at home quite well, mainly because it is not just because the child's family is very motivated or attuned to what needs to be done, but because the whole community is kind of aligned. Everybody values tahfidh, and there's a system in place that everybody buys into, so that if a child is waking up 7 o'clock in the morning and going to and spending an hour memorizing the Quran in the masjid, then that child isn't the only one, but is a child among hundreds and hundreds of other children. So the motivation is that we don't in this area in which is a predominantly Bangladeshi area, we don't have that kind of culture. So I think from our what we have inherited from back home in terms of tahfidh is it's very kind of rigorously teacher orientated, with very little input from the family, with very little input from the parents, and that's usually how it's always been done. That's how it was from my childhood. For example, when I started memorizing the Quran, I started in this area. I started memorizing at home, and I used to memorize 10 lines a day in Ford Square Masjid. I remember very clearly back in 1986, 87, 88, those years. I actually started and memorized Surah Baqarah back home in Bangladesh. We'd gone over there for a holiday for 6 months, and I had a cousin who was memorizing the Quran, so my father thought, well, he's memorizing every day, so why don't you just go along with him? And in those 6 months I memorized Surah Baqarah, so I have a little bit of experience of what it's like memorizing back home in a village madrasa as well. It's quite interesting. I won't go into that. So the point is that we have to constantly review our practices to try to see what we can do to make it, to improve it, to speed things up, to make it more rewarding for children, to make it less effort for them. So less effort, more results, and so forth. So firstly, in terms of giving you background, I wanted to let you know that this is an effort that we are constantly in, and we're having insets with regards to tahfidh, and we're investigating how there can be improvements, and we'll continue to notify you about these things, and we'll write up some of these ideas. I actually have plans to travel and look at some of the best practices in tahfidh schools all around the world to try to see what we can glean from them and what we can learn from them. There's also, in this day and age, a lot of psychological research on how the brain works, on how the brain memorizes best, what are the most efficient ways to get the brain to memorize faster. Some of which, not all, but some of this research or some of what memorization experts do, memorization champions, we know that there's international championships for memorization. There's stories of people who suffered from dyslexia, etc., etc. Some of you who've read up on this, you'll know about this. Extremely poor at school and so on, who just by developing certain techniques for themselves became able to memorize whole books in very, very short amounts of time. So we know that the ability to memorize is something that can be developed. In addition to the traditional kind of message, which is that it's a gift from Allah, and we know about great scholars of the past who used to memorize so well, and that you memorize better if you protect yourself from sin, and so on and so forth. All of this is true, but in addition to that, you end up with the natural gift of memorization from Allah, the added value of how your memorization is better, how you retain it better, how you're able to practice what you memorize better if you protect yourself from sin. But also if you investigate techniques of memorization, then your productivity increases manifold. And the idea is to keep our minds open about all of these things. And that's basically what we are doing in that regard. Most importantly, and this has been said to you before in other meetings, we want all of us, the school, parents and children, to align ourselves to a set of objectives that we feel are more Quran focused than just memorization focused. So although memorization of the Quran is something that every child will do here, we need all of us to be aligned to a set of objectives that are more to do with the broader objectives of the Quran. Okay, inshallah. And with that, I think we won't end up with tunnel vision with regards to memorizing the Quran, because parents can and even whole communities can become quite obsessive about just memorization, so that you end up with children suffering quite a lot of pressure as a result of an obsession to get a child to finish memorizing the whole of the Quran and so forth. Okay, and of course recently the media picked up on quite a nasty horror story about this. While the media's presentation of these kind of things is very disproportionate and kind of biased against the Muslims, I personally know that these things are not isolated, and these kind of things happen because parents get carried away with their desire to get their child to memorize the Quran because of all of the virtues that they know and so forth. So the first thing I'm going to do, inshallah, is I want to go through in a recent inset that we had with the tahfidh teachers, with all of the teachers that teach your children Hifz. We went through what we felt was some of the key objectives of memorization in terms of memorizing the Quran, but also in terms of memorization in Islam. So we kind of broadened the idea, and rather than just discuss with regards to just memorizing the Quran, we wanted to look at, we are an institute, an Islamic school that dedicates a certain number of hours, quite a large proportion of the school day, on memorization. And I think it would be an injustice if all we did was just discuss that effort of memorization solely in the context of memorization of the Quran, given that not every child will complete it. Not every child will complete the memorization of the Quran. So we felt that if we discuss the objectives of memorization in an Islamic context, in the broader sense, we will actually be able to achieve much more, and we will end up with more well-rounded children as well, following an effort like of 4 or 5 years of memorization continuously. So I wanted to share those with you. These things will be circulated, I'm sure. You will be sent information with all of these things written up, but I want to just talk about it briefly. So firstly, what are the objectives of memorization? Okay, so the first thing that we agreed, is easy to agree, I'll just go through it, is of course the pleasure of Allah. That we do whatever we do as Muslims, we do for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another important objective, and again if you consider it just in terms of memorization of Islamic content, the Quran in particular, and if we don't limit it to memorization of the Quran, then we won't end up focusing on the idea of my child finishing the whole Quran and becoming a Hafiz. Yeah? So if you notice, we're looking at what are the objectives of memorization in Islam as opposed to what are the objectives of becoming a Hafiz. The two things are very different. Becoming a Hafiz is very, very different from what it means to be memorizing as a Muslim. Okay, inshallah, or memorizing the Quran as a Muslim. So the second important objective of memorizing is to improve one's prayer, to improve one's salah. That is a fundamental part of memorization. So for example, if a child memorizes the Quran, or if we, and again, these objectives now will begin to apply to all of us, because if we don't just talk about becoming Hafiz and we talk about memorizing the Quran or the objectives of that, then that benefits all of us and it applies to all of us, parents as well. So it's to improve one's salah. So if you memorize parts of the Quran well, then you have more of the Quran to recite in your salah, you have more of the Quran to recite, to your rak'at can become longer, you have more of the Quran to recite in your tahajjud. You feel more motivated to perform tahajjud, feel more motivated to perform nawafil, and you enjoy your salah more. You enjoy your salah more, and because you've gone through the effort properly, your recitation is better, so you enjoy your recitation better as well. So improving your salah is an important objective. To inspire action according to the Quran, that has to be a key objective, that our children are not just memorizing, or we are not just memorizing just to know some parts of the Quran off by heart. That is not the only objective. If anything, that is a sabab. This is a cause to an end. It is a means to an end. Memorizing the Quran is actually just a means. If we focus all of our efforts on the means, then we will never get to the end. And the end is these objectives. So if we understand it like that, then memorizing the Quran isn't just about knowing it in our heads, because there are actually non-Muslims who know the Quran off by heart. Alright? But memorizing the Quran needs to be about practicing the Quran. It needs to be about putting the Quran into practice. And this is actually what the Prophet ﷺ spoke about in that hadith when he said that on the Day of Judgment, the person who knows the Quran will be told Iqra wartaqi, read and climb, and recite the Quran as you used to recite it well in the dunya, and the last station of yours will be where you finish your recitation. It will be at the last verse that you recite. فَإِنَّ مَنْزِلَتَكَ عِنْدَ آخِرِ آيَةٍ تَقْرَؤُهَا. In that hadith, often when we speak about it in English or in Urdu or in Bengali, we make it sound like that hadith is speaking about a Hafiz of the Quran. Right? But actually the hadith isn't speaking about a Hafiz of the Quran. Although a Hafiz of the Quran is covered secondarily. But what the hadith talks about is Sahibul Quran. Sahibul Quran is, literally that translates as a companion of the Quran. Somebody who is always with the Quran. And that basically means somebody who learns the Quran, memorizes the Quran, practices the Quran. Most importantly, practices the Quran. So the recitation of the Quran is reflective of practice. And some ulama have said that on the Day of Judgment, the Sahibul Quran will only be able to recite those verses that he practiced. So on the Day of Judgment, the Sahibul Quran will only be able to recite the verses that he or she put into practice, as opposed to just the verses of the Quran that he or she knew off by heart. Okay. Finally, of course, to attain virtues of the Quran. So all of the fada'il that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, like the one I just mentioned, to attain those is one of the objectives. Salvation of oneself and one's family. We know that the Prophet ﷺ has said that the person who knows the Quran will be able to take 10 people from his family to paradise, all of whom Jahannam or hellfire had become obligatory upon. So this is one of the great stations of the memorizer of the Quran, or the person of the Quran, in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept, by His permission, will accept such a person's intercession on the Day of Judgment. And this is of course also one of the objectives. One of the important objectives is preservation of the Quran. Islam is an oral tradition primarily. The deen has been preserved orally through people memorizing, and this is why, again, understanding memorization in the context of Islam is important. For 100 or so years, writing things down didn't become widespread in Islam. People used to make individual, kind of very limited efforts to write things down, including the Quran as well as the Hadith. The whole tradition of Islam, the whole culture was about knowing things off by heart and memorizing things. And this is how the deen was preserved, this is how the Quran was preserved, this is how the Hadith was preserved. And that continues to be the case today, particularly with the Quran. The memorization of the Quran has continued. And this is why Islam is one of those religions where it is going to be very, very difficult for anybody to manipulate the text of the Quran. Because so many people, even ordinary people who really don't know much, don't have a lot of knowledge about the deen, about Sharia, know the Quran off by heart. So it'd be very, very difficult, for example, and it has been historically, to wipe out the Quran or to manipulate or alter the Quran in any way, because of the fact that so many millions of people know it off by heart. Okay, most of you will know people personally on your fingers who know the Quran off by heart, and this is unique to Islam. This doesn't exist when it comes to Christianity. This does not exist in any other religion, in Christianity, in Judaism, and so forth. This idea of Hifz, particularly, what's unique about Islam is it has continued from the beginning of Islam until today. It has never stopped. So preservation of the Quran is an important objective. Another important objective is preparation for further studies, and you need to, this is really kind of connected to our objectives as a school. Every child that memorizes the Quran, we anticipate, we hope, it is our wish that that child continues to study the deen, continues to study the Arabic language, and continues to study the Sharia, and hopefully eventually in their life becomes an accomplished scholar of Islam. Knowing the Quran off by heart gives them a very, very good foundation for further studies, right? And it makes their further studies, for example, it makes studying tafsir easier, right? It makes learning the meaning of the Quran easier. It makes studying the Arabic language easier, and so on. So preparation for further studies is also an objective. Another objective is to inculcate in students a lifelong love of the Quran, right? And engagement with it. So for example, if when it comes to memorizing the Quran we pressurize our children so much that they end up to despise the effort, then we've lost the objective, right? Many children go through this. I have seen this in my own life, as having memorized the Quran and having been around hundreds of students in one room. You know, we used to memorize in one big hall. And I can say that the pressure to memorize on some of those children was too much. Because what I saw was, it wasn't a pressure to memorize and know the Quran. The pressure was to complete it. The pressure was, you know, in X number of years, you got to get through the memorization of the whole of the Quran. And therefore there was this constant pressure. And sometimes that pressure went with lots and lots of other things, you know, punishment, sanctions, getting into trouble, etc., etc., which eventually resulted really in the opposite of this objective. Instead of that child growing to love the Quran, he grew to really despise that effort and have very, very bad memories of their experience memorizing the Quran. So we don't want that. The whole idea is that we want children to love the Quran, and we want them to engage with the Quran forever. You know, one of the really bad things about the Quran now, and this has become consistent in Asian culture, I'm going to say this, and because I observe Asian culture a lot, and this is true, is that Hifz of the Quran has become about Taraweeh in Ramadan. Memorizing the Quran has become about Taraweeh. parents, the Hafidh themselves, the one thing that they're constantly on about, like the pressure to get yourself a place where you can lead Taraweeh, kind of kicks in a few months before Ramadan, and it doesn't matter that a young Hafidh isn't reciting the Quran every day, isn't reciting the Quran in his or her salah, that doesn't really have a strong connection with the Quran on a regular basis, isn't interested in learning the meaning of the Quran, isn't interested in improving themselves in the knowledge of their deen. As long as they're doing a good Taraweeh somewhere in a nice big masjid, everybody's happy. Alright? That is not the objective. The Taraweeh isn't the only objective of memorizing the Quran. So we want a lifelong connection and a love for the Quran. Two more. We want to make it easy to engage with the Quran. We want to make it easy to engage with the Quran in terms of recitation, study and reflection. So three things. So love for the Quran is what I said before, and make it easy to engage with the Quran. And we engage with the Quran in three ways. Recitation, we want to study it, and we want to reflect upon it. Alright, all three things are mentioned in the Quran. Reciting the Quran, of course, every Hafidh is able to recite the Quran, but again, it's no point. If all they do is wait for Ramadan before they actually start reciting it, then then the objective is lost. So if you're Hafidh, you're able to recite more. That's the whole point. If you're Hafidh, it's easier to recite. You can recite on the bus. You don't have to look in to the Mus'haf. You can recite in your salah. A couple of times a year, I end up kind of reciting my Quran when things aren't, when I'm able to focus on it, I end up reciting the Quran in my salah, kind of. So it kind of goes on for about, I think I'm able to sustain it for about 6 months of the year. And 6 months of the year, work and everything catches up, and you end up not being able to focus in that way. But a 3/4 of the Quran in salah, just in your daily salah, is easy. So there's revision sorted. You don't have to worry about revision. If you're reciting it in your salah, what revision? There's no need. And I often say that to students who are learning Hifz, that just get into the habit of reading it in your salah. You're going to read Fatiha. What's the point of reading Fatiha and then from Surah Fil to Surah Nas in every single salah? Alright? If you know like tens of surahs and juz, you know like 10 juz of the Quran, 10 paras of the Quran, but all you're doing is still reciting the last 10 surahs. How does that make any sense? What's the point of knowing those 10 juz? And that's the problem, that we haven't quite understood clearly, and our children haven't understood what the objectives are. So I'm sharing these with you so that you can reinforce these with your children as well. So we want to make it easier for them to recite, to study the Quran. It's how unfortunate that so many thousands and thousands of Hifaz, thousands, right, know the Quran off by heart, but spend their whole lives having not studied the translation of the Quran once. They've actually not studied the meaning of the Quran once. I know hundreds of Hifaz like that. Memorized the Quran, gone through the amazing effort, then spent the rest of their lives, they've not learned the meaning of the Quran once. The whole point is, you've got the memorization out of the way, recitation is easier. You actually have time on your hands to be able to study. To be able to study the meaning. If you don't know Arabic, then to study a translation, and also to reflect. Because as you study the meaning of the Quran, you begin to associate those meanings to what you've memorized. So you know what a particular verse means after reading it once. Because you're good at memorization. You've read the meaning, okay, that's what, as you read, you know that this is what this particular verse means. And the next step is you're able to think about it. Right? You're able to think and ponder about those verses. There is this common misunderstanding, and I want you as parents to get rid of this out of your head, that reading and understanding the Quran and pondering over the Quran is for scholars only. Alright? This is a complete false understanding of the Quran. Right? Or understanding of Islam. There's about 500 verses in the Quran, right? Around 500 out of some 6,500 verses that are what we call verses of law, right? Verses that are to do with masail and ahkam and so on, that sometimes scholars pay a lot of attention to try to understand what exactly are the details of the legal concepts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about in there, and they investigate the ahadith that elaborate on this, right? The majority of the Quran is for everybody to read, study and reflect on. Okay? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ, do they not ponder the Quran? In one verse, actually, he says it quite harsh. He says it in two places. One of them is the words are quite harsh. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do they not ponder the Quran, or are there locks on their hearts? Right? That verse, there is absolutely no evidence that that verse is about scholars. Absolutely none. Right? That is for every single Muslim to think about. Right? What does it mean when Allah talks about believing in the unseen? What does it mean for me? Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Jannah, Jahannam, what does that mean for me? Am I going to go to Jannah? Am I going to go to Jahannam? And even, other things. And alhamdulillah, some brothers and sisters do it. And I see ordinary Muslims, somebody recently sent a message to me. Ordinary Muslims, they make some amazing observations on the Quran. Amazing. Alright? So don't make fiqhi observations, but tadabbur of the Quran and pondering over the Quran is for everybody. Alright? And as Muslims, particularly as parents whose children are memorizing the Quran, we need to get that message into our heads. Okay? And finally, to inspire a lifelong commitment to memorizing Islamic knowledge. So I said that this was about memorization in Islam. If a child has memorized the Quran, there's one thing that child has proven. Right? That he or she can memorize. That they're good at it. Alright? When I first memorized the Quran, if my teachers had made me, I could have memorized anything. Alright? Now, going towards my late 30s, it isn't as easy. I'm still good at it, but it just isn't as easy because you just don't have the time. But back then, that's all I had time for, right? So I could have memorized anything. So that's one thing. So we need to get into our heads that if my child memorizes the Quran, then going forwards they can memorize other things. Particularly like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Alright? Core texts of the Quran. Okay? So this is something that they can do. Now, so this is one thing. Our objectives at Ebrahim Academy is to try to make sure that our students, as well as the parents, the teachers, everybody aligns themselves to these broad objectives. Okay? And Brother Ashraf, inshallah, will make sure that these get forwarded onto you. But it isn't just about becoming a Hafiz. Memorizing as an effort is different to becoming a Hafiz, which means that no matter how much a child at Ebrahim Academy memorizes, it is to be celebrated. No matter how much a child at Ebrahim Academy memorizes, you celebrate it. If your child doesn't finish the Quran and only does 5 juz, let's just say only does 5 juz, then your child has achieved something amazing first and foremost. All right, and you need to make sure that they practice those 5 juz, they remember them for the rest of their lives, all right, and that they are valued, that you show your appreciation for the fact that your son has memorized 5 juz. Okay, for too long now, the Muslim community looks at people who memorize part of the Quran like they're failures. All right, that is unacceptable because there is no general imperative in the Sharia for every single person to memorize every single verse of the Quran. However, there is a general imperative on every single Muslim to know some parts of the Quran, to memorize something, because we need it for our salah. And for that reason, the more you know, the better it is. And no matter how much you know, it's always good. No matter how much you know, it's always good. And how you know that this is true, this is a problem in our community, is most people that I know who only memorize part of the Quran, all right, they don't remember it. Most people that I know who memorized part of the Quran, 5 juz, 10 juz, because they couldn't become Hafiz. They went to an institute, right? They went to an Islamic school, tried to become Hafiz, couldn't finish it off. Later on, you meet them and I don't really remember it that well, and so on and so on. Why? Because they never memorized the Quran with a set of broad objectives in mind, all right? And in their minds has been this thing, that I failed. Because they only memorized 5 juz, all right? In their minds is this idea that I failed. And because of that, it's failure, right? Why put any more effort into something that is a failure? You fail, so why would you put any more effort into it? And this psychology basically plays on them. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen here. Our teachers need to make sure of it, all right? Our parents need to make sure of it. Our whole culture needs to make sure that is not what our children go through. Every single child will try and memorize the whole of the Quran. But memorizing the whole of the Quran isn't what's necessary. And this is why, and brother, you'll get to know this more and more now, in terms of how we set rewards for the children. Their rewards are set based on differentiated targets. So you can have a child who has memorized a whole juz in a month, right? And another child who has memorized only a quarter of a juz in a month, both being celebrated equally. This is the culture we're embedding in the school. Both of them, as far as the final verdict on their performance, the verdict for both of them can be exactly the same. If anything, it may turn out that the child who's memorized a whole juz, all right, is being told off, all right, or has a lower final mark than the child who's memorized less. Why? Because they're being set differentiated targets based on what their teachers feel they can memorize. And if they meet their targets, if they've met their targets, then alhamdulillah, it's celebrated. All right. So if a child, the target it was always that by year 10 they're going to memorize 10 juz, all right, then that child, as far as we're concerned, is a hafiz of the Quran. They're hafiz of 10 juz of the Quran. Okay. Now quickly moving on to some of the other key things that I want to talk about, because we started a bit late. One of the things I want to go through some specific points about what you can do as parents to support your child's memorization. Okay, so one of the first things is getting our thinking right, and that's why the objectives were important. But then there are some specific things to support your child. So firstly, I'd like everybody to think about how they can provide motivation, right, as a parent. I was speaking to a parent recently about because my son is memorizing the Quran at home, and me and my wife we supervise, and it's not easy. One of the reasons why it's not easy, and this parent, I said to this parent that they were struggling with what to do with the child, and I said, well, why don't you start getting some work done at home, because the child's father was hafiz, had memorized the Quran. And the parent said, well, the problem is that it's very difficult to have patience as a parent. We find that the teachers have more patience with our son than we do as parents. We lose our patience a lot sooner. And many parents will find that is the case, right? That when you're monitoring your child, when you're supervising their memorization, you tend to snap a lot sooner, all right? So I think we need to become more motivating, all right, and try to control the urge to do that, because as parent, because you're with your child all the time, you very quickly in your mind you think, I expect better from you, I expect more from you, I expect you to memorize it faster, I expect you to have done more lines by now, and then you lose your patience. Yeah. So I think we need to remember that when you're supervising your child, you're like a teacher, all right, and you have to have the patience of a teacher as well, and constantly motivate. A couple of basic tips is a few times a week, sit down with the family and talk about the virtues of the Quran. All right? Sit down with the family and talk about the virtues of the Quran. Take a book of hadith, an Islamic book. Shaykh Zakariya's Fadailul A'mal has a very, very detailed section on the virtues of the Quran with lots of good commentary. Read these things. Read them to your child. It's something that I would always recommend. It's something that my father used to do with us, and it was something that actually motivated me to memorize the Quran. So this is always beneficial. Learn what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the Quran in His own words. Learn what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about the Quran. This is you as parents learn. Don't just tell your children to learn. You learn as well. You have to invest some effort and some learning into your child's memorization. Okay? To motivate the children, make their effort to memorize the Quran the most important thing in your family. Make it the most important thing. All of you think, as parents think, what else is more important in your family than one of your children memorizing the Quran? What could be more important? Can any of you think of something that could be more important? I don't know, maybe your elder child's job, can that be more important than one of the younger ones memorizing the Quran? Right? Can your business be more important than your child memorizing the Quran? Yeah? Nothing. So make that the most important thing in your family. Make it the most celebrated thing in your family. Everybody puts their support and their motivating behind the child that's memorizing the Quran. Okay? And there's other things as well that's quite important. I'll come to that. Align what you say to your child in trying to motivate them. Align it to the objectives that we've discussed. And like I said, these objectives will be sent to you. So, for example, what that means is don't keep going on about your child completing the Quran. You know, you can clearly see that the teacher is setting realistic objectives that may not result in your child becoming Hafiz. If that's the case, don't keep pushing him about completing the Quran. Maybe at some point in his life he'll complete it. If you get your motivating right now, if you get your rhetoric right now, your child will remain motivated for the rest of his life and probably end up finishing it at some point, even if he doesn't finish at Ebrahim Academy. But if you push now to finish, if that's all you talk about, chances are that child will never finish. Because the experience of the time when they spent like a significant effort into memorizing will be a negative one. Because all they'll remember is constantly being pressured by everybody. Alright? So align it with the objectives. What you say, align it with the objectives that we've set out. Provide a conducive environment. I know, I think I remember saying this to some parents. It might have been Ebrahim Academy parents. You need to make sure that your child has somewhere where they can privately recite, away from the sounds of other siblings playing computer games, or away from other members of the family having chit chat or enjoying themselves and so on. Study time needs to be study time, and it's a good idea if your son has other siblings who also go to school. It's a good idea to make that time homework time for everybody. Alright? So if your child is memorizing at a particular time, that's homework time for the rest of the siblings. Everybody is doing something similar at that time. It's really bad to have one child kind of banging away trying to memorize their sabak for the next day, alright, while other siblings are playing computer games. Yeah? Or, you know, the family, there's a party. Yeah, and you know, other members of the family have been invited, and everybody's having fun and games and laughter, and your son can hear it, and he's locked up in a room memorizing the Quran. So make sure the environment is conducive, everything is consistent and more focused towards that child. All right. So don't invite family over. All right. And if you do, then don't get him to do his memorization at that time. Yeah. Seriously, don't ask your son to memorize while you've got 5 or 6 members of the family and other children over to play. Yeah, it's just unfair. All right. So you need to manage that process really well and make sure that the child feels motivated and that the environment overall is conducive. If you can, you know, a desk, we realize that, for example, at home, so my son has just started and he memorizes 3 or 4 lines a day in very small targets. He's just finishing off his first juz. And we realized that, you know, he needed privacy. So we completely redecorated the room that he stays in, put a proper desk for him in there and so on and so forth, made it much more airy. We allowed for more light to come in and so on, repainted his walls, just to give him an environment, a space where, you know, he felt happy. He felt like this has been made for me. All right? And basically and that's now where he spends memorizing, and it's easy to close the door because, you know, our second child is really young, so he disturbs quite easily. And you know, and that helps. He's actually just before preparing that room for him, he was actually struggling with his daily target. All right, now he sits in his room, memorizes his daily target, comes and tells us that it's done, and reads to me. That's it, finished. You know, it's done it. All right, it's much easier ever since giving him his own space, right, and showing that we're putting a lot of effort behind giving him that space. All right, all of a sudden, he finds his memorization easier because it's a psychological thing. Yeah. Right. Monitor. In our family, this is not going to be possible for everybody, but think about it. In our family, mothers tend to make, because there's more than one child in our broader family memorizing the Quran. Mothers tend to spend the time that the child spends memorizing. Mothers tend to spend that child with him or her. All right. So the mother is there sitting and she's doing something similar at the time. So, you know, she's also reading the Quran at that time, or she's also studying a book at that time. All right? I'm sure there's other work, but we can manage our schedules. Fathers can support a little bit, right? You know, parents-in-law can support a little bit to make sure the mother's freed up at that time to supervise her child while memorizing the Quran, because what I said before, the whole family has to be tuned into that one objective, right? So all it takes is if the child is reading for an hour, then it's an hour in the day where the mum basically sits with the child and makes sure. And there's a reason for that, and that is that you're able to supervise how efficiently your child is memorizing, because it's easy for a child to be memorizing and is reading and then it suddenly stops. and then goes off in some wonderland somewhere, right? You know, he's thinking about something else, and then comes back and reads. And so he's reading for an hour, but actually he's only been efficient and productive for about 20 minutes. All right, so you can observe that process. All right, if you're there, you can also observe how your child is memorizing. That's also important. Okay, so try to do that and give regular breaks. Try not to make your child read continuously for a whole hour. That's not a good idea. Okay, that is not a good idea. The brain's ability to concentrate for that amount of time is limited. It can't do it. Literally, the brain just can't function, particularly a child, right? So every 20 minutes, if it seems clearly that the child has begun to struggle or concentration is now beginning to wane, give them a break. Right? Give them a break, let them go have a glass of water, let them, you know, just walk around the house and so on. Or even let the break be a long one. Let them have a 20-minute break and play something, all right? And then, but make sure they come back and carry on, all right? Because you'll find that it's that the 20 minutes little bursts of memorization are much more productive than 1 hour together, all right? Because after 20 minutes, 40 minutes is tired memorization. The child is tired for those 40 minutes. Right, so make sure to break it up, inshallah. The other important thing is, and we can't really cover that fully, is one of the best things about monitoring your child and having the father or the mother sitting with the child is that you can help your child develop a technique that works for your child. Every single child, how they choose to memorize, eventually how they settle in terms of a technique will be different. Every child will have their own technique. So normally when it comes to memorizing scripture, right? So memorizing script, the basic technique is repetition. Yeah? So you take one verse and you repeat it 10 times. Right? 10 times is like a ballpark figure. You repeat it 10 times. Once that verse is memorized, go to the next verse, repeat that 10 times. Once the next verse is memorized, come back and repeat both verses 10 times. I'm just using 10 as an example, right? Repeat both verses 10 times until both are joined up. And the child can read both verses together. Move on to the third verse, read that 10 times. When that's memorized, go back to the first one, read 1, 2 and 3 together 10 times. Then the fourth verse, and then the fifth verse. And then after they've memorized a few lines, break it off and let them revise all of it until they know that properly, right? Then move on to the next 5 lines, right? So that's like a technique. Now, you know I just said 10. Eventually, your child will be able to choose individually and independently what number works for him or her, right? So some children will be able to do in 5. Some verses they'll need 15. Some verses they'll need 3, because some verses are easier to remember, some verses are difficult to remember. But it's too much to expect an 11, 12, 13-year-old to be disciplined about developing their technique on their own, right? It's going to take them a year, maybe 2 years to develop a consistent technique for themselves. That's why it's so beneficial for a parent to be supervising at home while they're memorizing. And we're saying that to our teachers as well, that teachers shouldn't just be focusing on listening to the child, but actually should be observing as children memorize to see what technique they're using and to assist them in their technique. Parents need to do the same. All right? And your conversations with your child's teacher needs to be along these lines. Or, you know, I've noticed he does this and I've noticed that he does that. How do you know, what have you observed? You need to have more informed conversation rather than, how's my son doing? You know, that's the bog standard question, right? But you need to be you need to get involved a little bit more, in a bit more detail. Inshallah. That's a basic example of a technique. If you're observing, you'll quickly realize, because you're adults, you'll quickly realize, hang on, he's doing these types of verses a lot easier. All right, so let me try and get him to kind of repeat a little bit less. So just to quickly finish off, finally, I got 2 more points. One is try to figure out how you're going to reward your child, right? How you're going to reward your child for memorizing. Don't make the mistake of saying, when you become Hafidh, I'm going to give you this. Don't do that, all right? Because that means you're pressurizing your child to become Hafidh, yeah? And you're basically saying, I'll give you a reward in 10 years' time, okay? Break it down. If you're thinking that I'd like to reward my child for memorizing, break it down. Oh son, every time you do a juz, every time you do half a juz, you know, inshallah, we're going to do this. All right? Make it reward orientated, but break that reward down. right? So we have a reward for our son every juz. You know, every juz he gets something special. All right. And lastly, invest in your own learning. If there is one thing that you've learned about what I said about the objectives of memorizing generally, right, then that one thing should be that it isn't just for your child. It isn't just for you, and you're in the perfect organization to be able to do that. Okay. You know, we have the Ebrahim Academy and we have Ebrahim College next door that's supplying courses for adults all the time, right? You know, this term we have 450 students, all like you, right? You know, like yourselves, parents who are studying the Quran, studying tajweed, studying fiqh, studying aqidah, studying hadith and so forth. All right? So invest in your own learning. Because otherwise the whole effort becomes, oh, you know, I want you to memorize the Quran. Why? Because I want you to be better. Well, but where's your example as a parent? Where is your example? What's the best way to show your child that what you're doing is important? What's the best way to show that? To do it yourself. Is to do it yourself, right? My classic example is a father says to his son, son, never smoke. All right? And then he goes outside and has a fag. That father is telling his son to smoke, even though his words are saying the opposite. All right? So you say to your son, I want you to memorize the Quran, I want you to become Hifz, but you never pick up the Quran yourself. All right? Well, effectively, you're contradicting your message. Okay? So invest in your own learning. Improve your own tajweed, so that then you can see, oh, you made a tajweed mistake there. All right? Improve your own recitation and fluency, because then you'll be able to take out your son's mistake when you check their reading. And the knowledge of the Quran is for everybody. It's obligatory upon everyone. So every parent should be able to support. And if you know you're not good enough, there's somewhere to go where you can actually improve. All right? You can take a private tutor, you can come to Ebrahim College to learn, but invest in your own learning. Jazakumullah khair.
أضاء الكون والزمن بإسلامي وإيماني